The warring parties have both declared a truce after 12 days of conflict. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu hailed the moment as a historic victory that will stand for generations. Chair of Middle East Studies at Dickinson College, Professor Mireille Rebeiz, joins me now for more on this. Prof, a very good afternoon to you. Thanks very much for your time. Certainly, according to the Director General of International Relations here in South Africa, Iran, Israel and the United States should be held responsible for breaking rules here.
Yes, absolutely. So it's a little bit complicated because it depends on how you look at what's happening. We cannot fully understand what's happening between Iran, Israel, and the United States without looking back at the history of these relations. But in terms of international law, the regime is definitely war and the terrorism. It has called for the killing of Jews and has funded terrorism in the region, whether in Iraq and Syria and Lebanon and Yemen. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, Israel and the United States have breached international law in a very scary and unprecedented way, in a sense that they opened the door wide open for lawlessness by breaching the sovereignty of the state of Iran. We cannot talk about international law and acts of aggressions preventively. One can criticize the state of Iran and put sanctions and declare it a terrorist regime, but we cannot preventively. International law does not allow prevention of war in such a way. So the United States and Israel definitely breached Iran's sovereignty. I was reading on the United Nations Special Rapporteurs of Human Rights and Counterterrorism, Professor Ben Sol. He fully agrees also that it's an act of aggression and it's a serious escalation in terms of human rights, not just for the region, but also for the whole world.
Well, the United States is taking responsibility for urging Iran and Israel to a ceasefire, should they?
Well, I mean, that's another thing. Like, the language that is being used is a language of escalation, even though there are behind the scenes push for negotiations of ceasefire. On the one hand, we've seen that we must go toward negotiations and diplomacy. There's no alternative way, especially that we are talking about three major forces: Israel, United States, and Iran. But on the other hand, the language that is being used is not reassuring in any way, shape, or form. Iran just put out statements yesterday that they won the war and that they're forcing the United States into negotiations. And of course, this doesn't sit well with President Trump. President Trump is using language that is threatening and menacing. Europe is also, the EU is not comfortable with what's happening and is also calling for negotiations. However, it's worth noting that the negotiation and diplomacy that happened under President Obama in 2015 was a good step towards improving sustainability of human rights and peace in the region, but was not flawless. One of the things that the deal did not address, for instance, is the continuous support of terrorism in the region. So in other words, Iran was funding wars in the region by proxy. In Iraq, in Syria, and particularly in Lebanon through Hezbollah. So any negotiations that we're heading toward, let me rephrase that, we must head toward negotiation and diplomacy, but any negotiation we move forward to should include Iran's funding of terrorism in the region.
What are the consequences, not only for the region, but indeed for the world, if this ceasefire doesn't hold?
Well, there's a lot of anxiety in the air in the region and in Europe. I was in Europe a couple of days ago. I was in France. There's a lot of anxiety in the air because you're talking really about powers that have access to weapons and missiles that are high range. We're thinking also of how this is going to impact the civilian population. You have a lot of people caught in the middle, a lot of civilians who have nothing to do with this war. Also, we're thinking about how this is going to impact refugee crisis in the region, how this is going to impact airspaces in the region. You know, we saw that Qatar's airspace was breached. Lebanon and Syria's airspace is continuously breached by United States and Israel, even though Lebanon, for instance, declared closing its airspace to military airplanes. You know, no one cares. So the anxiety is not just for the region, but also for the world, because what this conflict is doing is not just between the three of them and the region, but it's also going to have an impact on human rights internationally, on international law. It's also going to have an impact on terrorism. My concern is that we might witness a rise in terrorist attacks in the global north, because what these attacks are actually doing is reinforcing people's belief in the Iranian ideology, or what I call the Iranization of the region. So we're really heading towards a possible conflict of the global north versus the global south, or particularly, you know, Iran versus Israel, and incidentally the Palestinian territories.
And I was asking that question because there are also reports that Iran has passed a bill to suspend cooperation with the United Nations International Atomic Agency.
This is again where the concerns are. Like, they are escalating, and if I may also add a twist here, we're really in the realm of toxic masculinity, of who's more man and who has more power, and the language they're using is not a language of de-escalation in any way, shape, or form. So we have states that are going rogue. This is what we call them in international law. United States and Israel have been going rogue for a while in terms of the Palestinian territories, and particularly what's happening in Gaza. Iran with the funding of the terrorism as well. But also, this is opening the door for other states to act in similar fashion. For instance, United States has lost all its credibility in criticizing Putin and the aggression, the Russian aggression to Ukraine. So the concern, once again, is like we're seeing not only lawlessness and violation of international law, we're also seeing there's not just concerns for civilians and refugee crisis and breach of airspaces. There's really an opening of the door of lawlessness in the region for countries like China and possibly Taiwan, Russia, and Ukraine. But also, you know, nuclear weapon. We need to bring these people on a table, which does not seem to be happening anytime soon.
Well, while Israel is happy to reach a ceasefire agreement with Iran, more than 50 people have died in Gaza in the past 24 hours or so, according to reports. The irony is not lost.
You know, absolutely. Again, I see these events as intertwined. Iran has used and abused the Palestinian cause to justify its terrorism, no doubt about that. However, I believe what's happening between Iran and Israel is actually a distraction to the genocide, the human crisis, the weaponization of famine that we're seeing in Gaza. And again, the lawlessness that has been sponsored by the United States and Israel. So Israel has breached all kind of human rights laws and rules when it comes to Gaza. United States has continuously funded the war that Israel has been conducting in Gaza, despite the fact that we have, in November 2024, we had a General Assembly report saying that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza, and Amnesty International also issued a report saying that. So it is very ironic that now the focus is on Iran, United States, Israel, and Gaza is completely forgotten. And I'll even add the West Bank is even forgotten. My feeling or analysis on this, that it is all a distraction to allow for Netanyahu to swallow what is left of the Palestinian territories. Again, we are in a dangerous time for international law. This is an erosion, a complete erosion of international law when you have countries, big countries that sit on the Security Council, eroding international law and disposing of it like this. It is a really dangerous precedent. And definitely, it's a distraction from what's happening in Gaza.
Yes, because, I mean, people are asking why would the United States move so swiftly on Iraq versus Israel, and when it has done virtually nothing, with respect to what is happening in Gaza?
Absolutely. And if I may add this, as much as I would like for the regime, the Iranian regime, to fall, because it is a terrorist ideology, and it had done enough damage in the region, I caution us in looking at the United States as the liberator in the region as well. Precisely, if we look at its history in Iran and its history in supporting Israel and what's happening in Gaza. United States has blindly supported Israeli policy in the West Bank and Gaza. There's no doubt that October 7 were terrorist attacks. Civilians should never, ever be targeted. However, it would be foolish not to consider that that Gaza was a siege to begin with. And so when we know there are human rights violations at that magnitude, we know the ground is fertile for terrorism to happen. So United States ignored that for years. We have reports coming from Gaza and the West Bank saying that it's actually apartheid. We're no longer talking about just small human rights violations. So the key to all of this, to solve all of this, is really to think of how the Palestinian cause and the Palestinian people should have access to their rights, and we cannot speak of sustainable peace in the region without the Palestinian cause. So it's very ironic that the United States is very quick in supporting Israel, is very quick in responding to the threat from Iran, but yet, complete disregard to the Palestinian cause. And this is where I caution us from considering them as the liberator in the region. I would also add that the United States is always self-motivated by its own interest. I'm thinking particularly of oil in the region, all the way to cryptocurrency. So it's not out of love to the region that the United States is stepping in. It's out of its own interest that it's stepping in.
Professor Mireille Rebeiz, let me thank you very much for your time and insights, Chair of Middle East Studies at Dickinson College.